Alright, greetings and welcome to the second episode of Oblivion Modding Interviews, and today we're interviewing shadeMe, the author of Blockhead, and obviously shadeMe and the Construction Set Extended, and many other great and excellent utilities for Oblivion, and thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you for having me, it's absolutely a pleasure.
And getting started with our first set of intro questions, my first question for you is, when did you first stop playing Oblivion and the Elder Scrolls in general?
Well, Oblivion was my entry into the Elder Scrolls game series, and if I remember correctly, I bought the game late 2006, and I think it was about a few months after the game was released. But at that point in time, my computer wasn't kind of beefy enough to play the game, and if you might recall, Oblivion was supposed to be like the poster child for, graphics and whatnot at that point in time, back in 2006. And unfortunately, my asthmatic ant of a computer was a bit too weak to get it running, so I kind of saved it for posterity. And then later in 2008, I upgraded my rig and then was finally able to play the game that I bought those 2 years ago. And when I actually started, I kind of made the mistake that a lot of other players make, I guess, where by kind of trying out a ton of mods without actually knowing how they work, or how mods in general work in the Elder Scrolls games. So my first playthrough was a pretty buggy one, and it kind of lasted for about a few weeks, I think, before it was so all over the place that I really had to reset it and kind of start anew. But then the second one was a bit more, well, let's call it, it was much more easy to get through, seeing how I didn't have to constantly reduce my bounty using the console every time I spoke to a guard. So there's that, and I do kind of have Morrowind, but I've never gotten around to playing it, which is something I should do before I die, or so I'm told.
Oh yes, if there's absolutely one thing you should do before you die, it is play Morrowind, and then mod Morrowind, then play mods for Morrowind, and then make more mods for Morrowind, preferably somewhat in that order.
Well, duly noted. I shall do my best.
But anyway, moving on to the next question here. What inspired your forum handle?
It's curious. Well, my forum handle is actually an anagram of my birth name, give or take. There's a reason why the M is capitalized in it. But I guess I wanted to keep. I never liked the idea of coming up with different handles for each forum I was registered in, so I sort of came up with just one sort of identity I could kind of stick on to, and use it all around the internet, so to speak, which is probably not a good idea now that I think about it. But that's kind of how it came about.
Oh yeah, I'm also one of those people who uses a single identity. I've had the same identity since 2003, and the bright side is that you'll always remember your name, and the not-so-bright side is that anyone can look you up from today to the very time you first started posting and can find out any sort of opinions you might have posted online since then.
Yeah, that is true, yeah. But that's the price we pay, I guess.
Oh yes, the price for convenience. But anyway, what was your first mod, and how did you get the idea for it?
Well, technically, there were two mods. I had two first mods, if such a thing is even possible. I kind of came up with the ideas for both mods at the same time, or rather in the same sitting. And those first ideas were sort of the groundwork for my mods Ashes to Ashes and Pip. So Pip, that would be put it in its place. So Ashes to Ashes was the mod that was conceived first, and it was supposed to be a vampire death handling mod. But being that I kind of started off my modding career with it, so to speak, and once again I waded into the murky swamps of amateur modding, and I kind of wanted to do what every new modder always wants to do, everything. So what was supposed to have been primarily a vampire death handling mod kind of expanded into a bunch of other things, which involved companions, quests, and God knows what else. At some point, I think there was also, I don't know what it was, but it's supposed to be something funny. Anyway, so it was like the epitome of scope creep. So it was always being developed for a longer time, many months, to be honest. And in the meantime, I'd started working on my other mod, which was Pip. So I released Pip first, though, because it was a very small mod to begin with, and I kind of wanted to get something out there in the open, and it was also my first scripting mod. Well, and I had used OBSE for it, so it was sort of like a first run for many things. And the original idea for Pip came to me when I was going to my first playthrough. Is that I found that they had this key called the grab key, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out what I could do with it. So after a bit of mucking about and horsing around, I found that you could use the key to grab items in the game and move them around, and they would react as they would in the real world in terms of physics and whatnot. And obviously Bethesda had implemented this sort of showcase for their new physics engine, which was not present in the previous game, Morrowind, but I thought it was an extremely wasted opportunity, seeing how the game mechanics kind of kept you from using the key very often, because if you were to pick up an object that belonged to another NPC or another actor in the game, it would count as a crime. So the moment you pick up a mug in one of the taverns, you get a bounty of 10 gold or more, 10 septims on your head. So I found it to be rather counterintuitive and silly, so I kind of set out to changing that. So the first version of the mod circumvented the crime response to grabbing objects that didn't belong to you, and I think that was actually sort of one of my best mod releases, because it took a very little time from conception to release, and it was straight, simple, and small. So I didn't have to actually, I didn't end up going down the rabbit hole of scope creep. So I got that done, and over time, with more, as I continued to play the game with my mod installed, I came up with a couple of other ideas that I thought would make for a good addition to the mod. And because over time, the community was also participating with in the development of the mod in the way that they often, gave me feedback and ideas for new features. So that's kind of how it went. Ashes to Ashes eventually did get released, but it didn't. It had a slightly it's funny. I'm trying to think of the right words to describe how the release went. And the word I come down to is not particularly one I would be comfortable saying out there. But what suffice to say, it didn't work out well for either me or the mod itself, and I had to kind of take it down for a couple of other reasons, and it stayed that way on the back burner all the way until 2010 when I kind of rewrote it. But those were my two first mods, as it were.
Oh yes, and that's certainly an interesting development process that you went through to arrive at those two first mods. And I find it interesting that you call it scope creep. We in the Morrowind modding community call it feature creep, and I've noticed that pretty much every modder that I've ever encountered seems to have run into the feature creep problem at one time or another.
Yeah, I think it's inherent to the process of development, not just when it comes to mods, but also in other areas of creative processes, I guess. Well, the actual term scope creep is a lot more. I think, if I remember correctly, it comes from the computer science, or rather the programming industry, where you're creating a software application, and you stop adding little features than what's actually required for it, and just to make things a bit more convenient and whatnot. So I think that's the etymology of the term. But as you say, that's a huge problem for first-time modders, and it's something that they preferably avoid. But you can still find every time after you see that they, at least for the Elder Scrolls games, if you visit the modding forums of the game right after it's been released, you'll probably come across at least some 5 or 6 threads about this member wanting to create what do they call it? Yes, a full conversion, a total conversion mod, and they have these grand ideas of what they want to do to the game and kind of transform it into a completely new game and whatnot. But I mean, I admit that it is good, and it's probably essential to the modding process to have a plan, to have fairly grand ideas. But the thing that always works best is to start small and kind of work your way to your actual goal, which could be a huge quest mod or whatnot. But unfortunately, it's inherently kind of present. It's a part of the process, and therefore can't quite be avoided unless you actually sit down and consider what you want to do.
Oh yeah, and that's very true, is that it's always best to start off small and then move on to the grander ideas, like your pip, which started out as a fairly simple idea and then sort of evolved over time. Though it is, it's difficult sometimes to limit yourself when you can think of all the random possibilities, like building up entire cities or stuff like that. It's very enticing, but actually going through and finishing it is another thing entirely.
Yeah, it's true, and I think that's sort of kind of like the initial draw of modding video games. At least that's how I find it. That you can kind of do whatever you like. It's like, at least with Bethesda's games, with the Elder Scrolls games, the sandbox is not only open to the players but also to the modders. So I find it to be a very unique proposition in terms of modding, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think I've ever come across another game which supports modding in such a scale. So I do believe it is quite important, and as long as you have kind of can balance out the things in the right way, and it just works for the best then.
Oh yeah, and you've sort of gone into my next question here, and that is, what draws you to modding video games?
Well, as I just said, it's sort of the creative. It offers a lot of venues to be creative, I find. And I primarily mod just the Elder Scrolls games, by which I mean Oblivion and to a smaller extent Skyrim, but I think one main thing that contributes to, that counts as a draw to modding, is that you can always kind of get tangible results of your work. So there's always a sense of accomplishment when you see something you've programmed or something you've set up, a quest or a very large branching dialogue, and it just works after you give it a test, and then it's a sort of very, very intoxicating feeling. And that sort of, it kind of draws you on. It's into working a lot more at it. And once again, this is a feedback loop of sorts. So the better you get at it, the more time you spend on it, and it kind of feeds itself. And personally, I write code during the day as well, so to speak, for a real job. And I just find that the fact that I can put those skills to use in a completely different domain, I find it to be extremely fulfilling in a lot of ways, intellectually and also otherwise. And that kind of, that contributes a lot more to being a draw when it comes to modding games, because I primarily mod for myself, as opposed to kind of, just releasing something and kind of expecting endorsements and downloads and whatnot. So that is sort of like the primary goal for me, is to spend my time productively doing something which I like. And of course, last but not the least, and certainly not the least in any event, is the community. And the Elder Scrolls modding community is I have seen no other community online, and I've been online for a while now, that is as friendly and welcoming and, as helpful as the modding community, and that contributes a whole lot as to why I keep returning to this. I mean, I've been I started modding back in 2008, and I'm still here, nearly 8 years later. And the only reason I come back to it is, there's always it's kind of another home, so to speak, if you allow me to speak a bit more banality. But it's, you kind of, it's very inviting. It's an inviting place to be, and you kind of get used to, how things will work out when you are in the community. And yeah, that would be one of the other important factors.
Since you pointed out, the modding is very fulfilling. In fact, I kind of think that modding has sort of ruined gaming for me, because I can't really play games that much anymore, because I would much rather be modding, because I find it much more fulfilling than actually playing a game. And as you said, the community is very friendly, and it's a sort of positive feedback loop that you're kind of talking about here, is that you release some mods to the community that you've had fun creating, they like it, they give you positive feedback, that makes you feel more fulfilled, then you want to do some more mods and get more feedback, and the process just continues on and on. It's sort of like Ouroboros, I suppose, is one.
Yeah, perfectly. I mean, that's the picture that came to my mind when I was talking about it, and yeah, it is true. I mean, only in this case, the snakes. It's not one. A snake sounds a bit more ominous, I guess, but maybe a rabbit eating its own tail. Does that actually? Well, it doesn't conjure a very nice picture in any event. So, moving on.
Oh yes, definitely some interesting images right there. But I guess moving on to some more specific modding questions. One of your most popular mods is Blockhead, a sort of very technical Oblivion scripting extended plugin that allows animations and body assets to be overwritten in Oblivion. At least that's what I think it does. Remember, I'm a Morrowind modder. I have no idea what goes on in the Oblivion community. And I was sort of just curious, how did you get the idea for this mod, and what was the development period like for it?
Well, to be honest, the idea wasn't mine to begin with. It was something I just got from another member of the Oblivion community. It all started when Nuska, that was her handle, she's a Skyrim modder who had released the Skyrim character overhaul mod. I believe that was the name of the mod, which kind of overhauled all the texture and model assets for all races in Skyrim. And she also released another mod called Better Faces, if I remember correctly, which got a lot of attention and was very popular. And I believe she wanted to bring that to Oblivion. But as you can imagine, Oblivion's engine is kind of old and rather limited. So it's not as expansive as Skyrim's, and it doesn't have a lot of features that are, for instance, present in Skyrim. One of those is the possibility to have gender variant head models for races. So a female dark elf, for instance, would have a different model for the head than a male dark elf in Skyrim. But in Oblivion, all races well, not all races, but rather each race comes with just one head model, and they're shared between the male and female gender variants. So this kind of limited what she wanted to do, I guess, and then at that point in time, I was curating. I was still working on OBSE, the Oblivion script extender, and she dropped by in one of the threads, and she just wanted to know if it would be possible to patch the game, or rather, create a plugin for the OBSE project that would add support for gender variant head models. And I think it was a Saturday, or it was a weekend in any event, but and I had a bit of time, so I said I'd give it a shot, and it was a Sunday. I don't think about it. Yeah, it was a Sunday, and I had a very productive Sunday afternoon, after which I haven't had in a long time, incidentally. Which by the end of which I was able to write a proof of concept plugin that allowed gender variant head meshes in Oblivion. So this was entirely Nuska's idea, which I kind of implemented. So all credit to her in that area. And as it went on, she went ahead to create the Oblivion character mod, which I believe is one of the most popular mods on the Nexus at the moment. And to be honest, almost all of Blockhead's popularity is due to the fact that her mod requires the plugin. So, credit where credit's due. That's where I'd say, all of the popularity comes from. And after the initial release, I guess more features were added as and when required. She required the newer versions of Oblivion character all required a bit more features. I suppose I guess it was about overriding eye meshes or something along those lines, and I was able to kind of add those too. And since it was popular on its own, a lot of other members came around asking for more features, and so I kind of obliged and implemented, for instance, full scale body and head mesh overriding, and a bunch of other stuff too. So it kind of moved on naturally from there.
Going into this next question, you've also made the construction set extender for Oblivion, which is something I'm actually kind of rather envious of, since we don't really have anything like it for Morrowind, except for, I guess, the open construction set. But how did you get the idea for the construction set extender, and was there some particular limitation that prompted you to create the extender in the first place?
Well, I think we come back to the scope creep aspect of modding. To be honest, the construction set extender, or as I'd rather call it, the CSC, it's much shorter, and I don't want to spend as much effort saying it out loud. Well, it has very humble beginnings, and this was back in 2010, March, if I remember correctly. I was just getting into developing OBSE plugins, and I was just fresh out of coming out of the development of one of my other plugins, and I guess I just wanted to dabble a bit on the editor side. I mean, Bethesda's mod editors are extremely extensive and comprehensive. They are not the best in class, so to speak. They always come, just like the games, if you don't mind my saying that, with their fair share of bugs. But, perhaps that's what endears us to them. So my point being, it could use a lot more polish, and I figured I might, kind of contribute in that area. So my initial intention was just to kind of find a way to automatically indent scripts in the script editor. Seeing how I was essentially a script modder, and most of my mods were involved writing a lot of scripts, I figured it would be useful to have this tool to automatically indent scripts in the CS. And after an initial proof of concept, I figured I had a very brilliant idea of adding another feature, which essentially ended up being a bit more error checking, which detected a lot more errors than the vanilla script compiler. So one thing led to the next, and soon enough I was extending the script editor so much that I had to rewrite it entirely, and at which point it seemed to me that it would be a good idea to kind of get the community's input on it, and you can I guess you can imagine where that led to, and so soon enough there's a bunch of things on the to-do list, and so it started. And it wasn't long before I actually moved on from just modifying the script editor to improving other areas in the construction set, like fixing bugs and crashes and whatnot. So that's how it started, and the initial development happened within a closed group, over the group of beta testers, so to speak, and who were essentially modders from the community. And it went about from many months in any event, and all the way till December of 2010, right before the time Skyrim was announced. So I sort of bet Skyrim's fancy release date of 11/11/11 by releasing the construction set extender on 1/1/11. So yeah, I got that one on Bethesda, and I shall treasure that victory.
Oh yes, definitely a great release date for that, and sort of going into that, for someone like me, who's a little unfamiliar with the Oblivion modding scene, what with being a Morrowind modder and all that, what all new features does the construction set extender add to the construction set that weren't there previously?
Well, it's actually a whole bunch of stuff. Too many to list out, really, which is why I kind of wrote the 60-page manual back then. But, okay, I'll try and go through an abridged, you're going to read out an abridged version of it. For starters, it fixes a lot of bugs in the vanilla CS, for instance. There's always a problem of unwanted edits or, identical to master edits and crashes that randomly happen. So I started off by fixing these minor annoyances, and then kind of worked on a bit more with the editor's stability and performance. And actually, Bethesda had released one update to the Oblivion construction set after the game's release, which broke the lip sync generation tool. So you couldn't create lip sync files for new dialogue created with the CS. So this was broken for the longest amount of time until I was lucky enough to find out a way to fix that with the construction set extender. And there's one, and you have the brand new script editor, which is essentially like a complete development environment for scripters, so which has tons of features similarly found in tools like Visual Studio and whatnot. A number of workflow improvements, better asset selection, filterable form lists, a global undo-redo option, copying data between different CS sessions, and there are a lot of improvements to the general user interface of the construction set. For instance, to kind of make the dialog windows use more screen real estate. And perhaps one of the more defining features of the construction set extender is that it adds a completely new scripting language for the CS, one you could use inside the editor to automate things. It's sort of like a macro language, which lets you automate, for instance, item placement, cluttering, what have you. So that was one of the major features that I was able to implement. And there's also a batch reference editor, centralized use info window. I forget what that is. I should probably take a look at the manual myself. And the latest version added support for multiple object windows, and I was also able to sort of port or implement the object palette dialog from the creation kit in the CSC, and also object prefabs. That is the abridged list.
Oh yeah, and that sounds like, quite a list of really useful features, like that being able to create microscripts that can actually do things for you automatically. There are so many tedious things involved in modding that don't really require that much effort, but you have to go through and do them anyway, and they're just very tedious, and that's definitely a great thing to have. I kind of wish we had something like that for Morrowind. And another thing I noticed, it's, Bethesda, really everything they make is buggy to at least some extent. We have the same problem with unintentional edits with the Morrowind editor, and I think they had that problem with the Skyrim editor. It's like everything they touch is just buggy to a certain extent.
Well, to be honest, I actually kind of agree with you, although I hear the sound of disemboweling cutlasses being sharpened for having said that out loud. But, well, that is kind of true. And incidentally, I was also a part of the Creation Kids beta testing program. I mean, that was shortly after Skyrim's release, and they were looking for a couple of modders to beta test the CK, as it were. And since I'd worked a bit on CSE, I was able to offer them a couple of, a slightly more detailed view of where the problems were and what the problems were that had kind of carried over from the Oblivion construction set. And I guess, they did fix a lot of bugs that were there in the previous construction sets with each new iteration. Should give them that much credit at the very least. And they were diligent enough to kind of add new features and workflow improvements as we kind of requested for them during the beta testing phase. So credit where credit's due. And again, they are willing to listen, I guess, but on their own terms, perhaps. I don't know. But levity aside, they are doing well. Their games have been a lot more complex. They have been getting a lot more complex with each iteration, and with the projects of such scope and size, you're bound to come across a few bugs here and there. But yeah, that does happen. Although, now that you mentioned about it, I'm not sure if this might work with the Morrowind construction set. The unwanted edits was actually a side effect of the source control system built in the construction set. So I do not have any experience using the Morrowind construction set, but if there is such an INI setting or some such option to disable source control in the Morrowind construction set, one could try that out and see if it fixes this unwanted edits issue. It just might, so it's worth a shot, but once again, no guarantees.
Oh yeah, I'm not entirely sure what causes all the unintentional edits, but luckily we have a lot of cleaning programs for that, so it hasn't been that big of a bother. Mostly it's just getting newer modders to use those cleaning programs when they release some mods. But anyway, one of the other questions I have for you here is that another one of the mods you've made is the graphical enhancer mod shadeMe, conveniently named after yourself, which adds dynamic shadows to Oblivion. And I noticed in your mod description that this was a project you had been working on for a while, and I was wondering, what were some of the difficulties with getting dynamic shadows to work in Oblivion, and how much were you influenced by Morrowind's graphics extender for Morrowind?
What you're right about my having, well, it was a fortuitous name, to be honest, But yeah, I guess it was just leading up to that point where I'd eventually create a mod that would basically have the same name as my forum handle. So, well, that I did get done. But to get to the meat of the question, I started working on the initial proof of concept many years ago, actually, and one of the main reasons I got down to writing OBSE plugins was because I was kind of interested in figuring out some way to implement these dynamic shadows into the game, since they used to be there right during the earlier builds of the game, especially if you look through some of the E3 presentation videos that Bethesda made for Oblivion. You'd find that they do have full volumetric shadows and a lot of other graphical enhancements, which were unfortunately removed for the final release. So that was always a pipe dream for me to kind of implement these, and I did not have a lot of success with it when I initially got down to modding, and then I put down the idea on the back burner and moved on with my other projects. But sometime during CSE's development, so This is back in 2010. And incidentally, a weekend, I guess. So I guess I have productive weekends every now and then. So I was just trying out a bit of a new idea I had about implementing the shadows for all objects, and it kind of worked out, and it was very much a surprise to me, and well, it did, and that kind of got the ball rolling. And as I mentioned earlier, Oblivion's engine is seriously kind of, it's GIMP in a way, because the current graphics code does not actually allow for a lot of shadows. So they've just kind of put it together right before the game's released to add shadows for just NPCs and the player character. So this kind of brought to the table a lot of other problems which kind of were made apparent when I started working on this. So, for instance, you could have shadows overlapping each other, and they would be darker, and large objects would cast really strange-looking shadows and whatnot. And there were a number of other issues with performance and projection and whatnot, but I guess the engine, despite all its limitations, was kind of malleable enough to support new dynamic shadows for all objects at some level. So there's that. And what in regards to the Morrowind graphics extender, well, I sort of drew inspiration from it in a way, and when I actually started with the initial proof of concept, I think the graphics extender was going through its own resurgence, so to speak. There was also a side project called the Morrowind MGE XE, which had implemented dynamic shadows in Morrowind. So that was sort of like an inspiration for me to kind of implement something similar here in Oblivion. But that wasn't more or less all in terms of the Morrowind graphics extender. I had envisioned to port it over back to Oblivion, which would have essentially fixed a lot of bugs in the Oblivion engine, but I never got around to getting that done, seeing how it's a large project to begin with, and I wasn't really inspired enough, I guess, to port all that code and implement it for Oblivion. And I guess it was, in a way, it was sort of a success. It's still a proof of concept mod, shows that you can do it. This can be done, and I think it's remained that way ever since its inception, and it's probably going to stay that way.
Oh, yes, and, well, you sort of already answered my next question, which was about where you got the idea for enhanced grabbing. You sort of answered that before, so I'm just going to skip right on ahead to my next question, outside of that one. You've also made a few mods for Skyrim, and can you tell us a bit about those?
Well, yeah, apparently I have. Well, I think, all my Skyrim mods are plugins for the Skyrim script extender. I never really got down to the actual Skyrim modding scene because, well, it was a bit too different from Oblivion, to be honest, and it involved a completely new scripting language, which meant I had to learn it anew, and I just didn't have as much time at that time to invest in modding a new game as such. So I just stuck with what I knew, and I made most of my mods, if you'd call them that, as script extender plugins, and there are 4 of those, with the exception of one, or the rest are just essentially modder resources, which are tools for modders, and sometimes for players as well. One of the plugins is called Smart Zones, and I think that's probably the only one that would even qualify to be called as a mod, because it actually modifies some of the gameplay elements. So the basic impetus behind that one was to prevent lower quality souls from using up higher quality soul gems, so that you would have a lesser soul filling up a grand soul gem, so that would have been a waste. So that kind of, I think it was requested at some point in the modding forums, and I kind of put together something just to get my feet wet on in Skyrim modding plugin development. So that was the one mod, and perhaps the most popular mod I've released so far, if you go by the number of downloads and whatnot, is the Fuzz Row Do silent voice mod. This is actually a modded resource, and it's essentially an analog for the silent voice mod OBSE plugin from the Oblivion modding scene. So what it does is it adds silent voice support for unvoiced dialogue added by new mods. So without this plugin, the game would simply skip over the mods without any voice acting. So you just have the subtitles displayed for a short amount of time down, and then it would skip over to the next dialogue line and so on and so forth. Using this plugin would cause it to pause and give you ample time to read the subtitles. And there are also a couple of other features, like lip sync support for unvoiced dialogue that I added into the plugin at a later date. But that was essentially it. And the other two plugins were essentially more bug fixes, a couple of minor bug fixes in the game engine, and yet another modded resource, which is called Conscribe, which made a node which kind of saved all the console output to a log file. So that was about it, yeah.
Now, I'm actually sort of surprised that Skyrim didn't have support for silent voices to begin with. I mean, it seems like a kind of obvious feature, since most modders aren't probably going to have the time to go through and get professional voice actors to actually voice the dialogue. And it seems like such an obvious feature from someone with the perspective of a Morrowind modder, where all dialogue is unvoiced and it's pure text, and it's awesome because you can just read it instead of hearing it dribbled out to you, so to speak.
Yeah, I know. Actually, funny you should mention that, because I think at some point I made a mod called Mute for Oblivion, which essentially did kind of brought over Morrowind's speech system to dialogue system to Oblivion. So what it would do is it would disable voice acting for all voices and just let you keep the subtitles and just the text. So, but you would think that it's a sort of like an important feature, but from Bethesda's perspective, I suppose it's just one more thing that it's a minor sort of thing for them, I guess, in terms of allocating resources for development. I don't think it kind of figured into the long list of things that they wanted to implement, I guess. So, well, you can't fault them for it either. They are a big company and they have to make those games, I suppose.
Oh yes, that's true, but to my mind, you see a lot of RPGs out there that they only have the major characters voiced, and then they have a bunch of minor characters that aren't voiced but still have dialogue. And it seems like they could have, used that system with Skyrim to sort of, give characters a bit more dialogue instead of the one or two sentences that they might have. And it would be such a simple thing to do, I would think, to just add that feature in with support for unvoiced dialogue. But I don't know, maybe I'm crazy.
Well, I kind of agree with you, to be honest, but I think that speaks a lot more about the audience the Elder Scrolls games have right now, as opposed to whether it's entirely contingent on Bethesda's wishes. So I think it's come down to a point where we kind of expect all games to cover voice acting and professional voice acting, and nothing less than that. So it's sort of, I guess, that puts a sort of pressure on all game development studios to kind of keep up to that expectation. So, and perhaps that's the sort of reasoning they're going for. Sadly, not one I'd be very that I'd agree with entirely, like you. But well, I guess there's not much we can do about it, apart from making such plugins, I suppose.
Oh yes, sadly that is probably true, and well, just going on to our next set of questions here, we have some general modding questions. And the first of these is, do you do any planning before you start a mod? And if yes, how?
At the very beginning, I did do a fair bit of planning. I actually had a modding idea book, so to speak, and I think I kind of jotted down the sort of important salient features of my mod, and kind of made a basic flowchart and whatnot, but I don't quite remember what my process was back then. But then later on, it just I just started winging it. I just made it up as I went along, and which is probably why I ended up with the problem with scope creep or feature creep, as you call it. So that's one thing I think, it's probably a good idea to keep an idea book and jot down things and keep to a particular plan. Otherwise, things can get a bit haphazarded and you kind of lose yourself in the general. Use sort of an overview of how you want things to be. So, but now since I started developing script extender plugin, it's mostly been about writing code, and in that case, it's just about it all comes down to working out potential solutions for problems in my head, I suppose, and then kind of implementing them as I went along. So yeah, it's basically me playing it by the ear, although I shouldn't.
Oh yeah, though I do think a lot of modders, sort of do that play-by-ear thing where they don't do a whole lot of planning, they develop it as they go along, and then maybe they'll get finished one day and release it. I know one modder is still working on a house mod that they started 8 or 9 years ago, for example.
Okay, I mean, that just made me feel so much better about my own myself, to be honest. I really wish them the best of luck, and maybe, they could, after hearing this interview, if at all they do, they might find the inspiration to get back to it and kind of release it.
Oh yeah, and stories like that are very common, it seems. And going into this next question, are there any mod ideas you had that you did not pursue, and for what reason?
Well, this comes back to my original Ashes to Ashes mod idea. Well, I kind of, at some point, I realized that I was adding too many features to the mod, so I kind of broke it down into another mod, which would have involved adding a lot more AI to vampire NPCs. For instance, needs to consume blood and stay out of the sunlight and whatnot. But I never got around to doing that, mostly because I kind of moved away from regular modding, by which I mean writing scripts and using the group construction set to create those mods, and so that kind of went away. That stayed on the back burner, as it were. And there was also another combat AI mod that I wanted to implement, but then I found out that it was already implemented by a number of other mods, like deadly reflexes and unnecessary violence. So it didn't make much sense to reinvent the wheel, and there are a couple of other quest ideas too, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember what they were about, but I don't even know what happened to those, but they were there at some point.
Oh yes, and I don't really understand why you would need any combat overhauls for Oblivion. I mean, the Morrowind combat system is clearly the best combat system in the entire Elder Scrolls series, and that's just, that's perfection. You don't really need anything more than that.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention it, you probably are right about that. That's probably the font of combat mechanic brilliantness, I guess. But some people just like to see a lot more blood and gore and entrails, I suppose. So more power to them.
Oh yes, I suppose. And have you been influenced by any non-Elder Scrolls games when you make mods?
Well, I can't recall any specific instances, but I'm sure that I borrowed ideas from other games. Well, before Oblivion, I actually started dabbling with modding Diablo 2. So that's kind of when I started off. That's when I got into the rather large arena of video game modding. So my initial mod, so to speak, were kind of influenced in some way or another by Diablo 2, I suppose. But apart from that, I'm sure there are other games that I drew inspiration from, but can't seem to think of any as such.
Conversely, are there any modders who have inspired or influenced you in some way with the creation of mods and whatnot?
Well, many, to be honest. Too many to list out there. But if I were to pick out a few, the ones that on the top of my head, I guess, I'd say the Script Extender team members, Ian Patterson, Stephen Abel, and Paul Conley. I mean, these guys were like, they're essentially modding royalty. They wrote some of the best tools for Bethesda's games, and they're still doing that, incidentally. I mean, if you look at these Fallout 4 modding forums, you'd find that they're still at it, and it's barely been a few weeks since the game's released, and they already got the first version of the Fallout 4 script extender out. So, if there was a modding royalty, it would be them. And apart from them, of course, a lot of other members, I guess, like Dev_AKM, Qual, and I suppose from lots of other, the names just don't spring to mind, I suppose. Tajon was another modder who kind of inspired a lot of my mods, and plenty more, to be honest.
Oh yes, that sounds like quite the list, and I'm sort of curious, what modding projects are you currently working on, if any, assuming you're still working on Oblivion, or if you're still working on, say, Skyrim mods instead?
Well, none, sadly, well, at least, well, for the most part. At the moment, I guess I'm kind of semi-retired, if not fully retired, from modding. I barely have the time to, that I can use to spend modding. But over the last couple of weeks, although I have managed to write a few lines of code for the CSE, but those are far and few in between. There's also a general lack of inspiration these days, I fear. But I find that most of my existing projects are essentially feature complete, in a sense. So I don't work on my current on those anymore, except for, of course, CSE and maybe one or two others. I have promised myself that I'd return to developing OBSE at some point in the future, but that's always the sort of, that's the thing, that time is always the infinite jest, and if and when I find the time, I might return to it. Hopefully there'll still be modding Oblivion when I get back to working on OBSE, but I guess time will tell.
Well, if you are looking to retire, there's this lovely land full of dark-skinned people with red eyes that you should definitely come, and just sort of retire there. It's this lovely place called Morrowind. We have such a great community. We would welcome you with open arms. You should retire there.
Yeah, I think I'll actually give it some serious thought. How's the skooma there? That's probably the most important and pertinent question.
Oh, it's great, and best of all, there's smugglers everywhere, so you can find it every about 5 feet. Imperial law is very ineffective, I have to say.
Well, you've convinced me. I'm probably going to. I'll do that very soon, I guess. Very, very soon.
But all kidding aside, sort of moving on to this next question. If you could make a single change to the capabilities of the construction kits, other than the ones you've made already with the CSE, what would it be exactly?
I guess I'd make it a bit more extensible, kind of add an API, or sort of a programming interface for modders to add custom features to the game engine, as it were, or to the construction set. That would be sort of, the ultimate pipe dream. But, But apart from that, I guess the construction set is always feature complete within the limits of technology, I suppose, for that particular game. So if one were to have the opportunity to kind of expand it in a way, that would probably be, the sort of holy grail.
Since you mentioned custom features, are there any particular custom features you'd like to see get added to Oblivion at some point?
I'm assuming you're talking about the game itself, and in which case I wouldn't really know. I mean, I guess I should be playing the game a bit to maybe if I had played the game a bit more in the last 5-6 years, I would know a bit more of what is lacking. But honestly, I can't think of anything. I think the question is better suited for. I think I'm probably in the same place as you are right now, being an Oblivion modder. That I know literally next to nothing about Oblivion apart from how it ticks. That's essentially about it. And yeah.
Oh, well, going on to a perhaps easier to answer question, how much do you use the community to get feedback and motivation for your mods?
A lot, I would say. A majority of the feedback, or almost, by definition, all the feedback I get is from the community. And motivation, on the other hand, well, it's slightly a bit more tricky to put right, to define, because while I do more for my own reasons, just to kind of my own, to fulfill my own intellectual requirements, if you will, I'm just as motivated to be able to contribute in some way back to the community. I mean, having played the game with mods, be it so many years ago or otherwise, I do have an appreciation for how much work, and having modded all these years, I have a very good appreciation for what goes into making a mod. So it kind of makes me want to contribute a bit more to the community, and that is sort of one of the major reasons why I sort of even come back time and again to the modding community. And as always, it's always a pleasure to read a particular mod or tool user narrating their experience with one of my mods or tools. So that always, comments that make you smile. So those are always, something to look forward to, I guess. And which kind of brings me back. At this point, I think I would talk a bit about why I didn't really get down to the Skyrim modding community, because it's an entirely different vibe over there. I mean, I'm sure you know that, you being predominantly from the Morrowind community, that the Oblivion and Morrowind communities are kind of different in a number of ways. And I found that, it's essentially the same, but only a lot larger in scale between the Skyrim and Oblivion communities. And it wasn't very conducive atmosphere, not even a very inviting atmosphere, to be honest. And it's sort of why I kind of only just dabbled a bit in modding Skyrim and just kind of kept myself to the CSE and my other projects of Oblivion. So my point, if at all there was one, would be that the community setting plays an extremely large role. Not just for me, I think it does for a lot of other modders too, and it should, in my humble opinion.
Now, you sort of mentioned, how the Skyrim modding community can seem kind of, uninviting a bit, and, I can't help but think that, even though I'm a Morrowind modder and all other communities are vastly inferior to the Morrowind modding community, I do have to somewhat suspect that perhaps a lot of that has to do with, how new that community is. You have a lot of the more aggressive people who are still around in the Skyrim modding community, and they'll probably get bored and move on eventually to the next game or something like that, and the community will probably eventually mature like the Morrowind community and the Oblivion community has, and become more friendly and inviting. I did an interview with a couple of Morrowind modders who were around during the early days of Morrowind modding. They were telling me about just how much vitriol was going on in the Morrowind modding communities in the early days, which is kind of really hard to imagine today, but there used to be a lot of very angry people attacking modders for the mods they created back then. So it's something that sort of dies down with time, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that, to be honest, but But sometimes, there's a complete shift in paradigm, and that, that no matter how long it takes, I mean, sometimes that doesn't change and leaves behind a sort of, background noise, so to speak. And I think even the dynamics have changed a lot in the Skyrim community, at least, I mean, in comparison to the Oblivion, I think. But yeah, maybe time will tell. Well, I can't really be sure. It has only been 4 years now, yeah. And come on, Morrowind has been around for more than a decade, and it's still going strong, which is something I kind of envy, because the Oblivion community's kind of shrunk and, got a bit back into stasis, so to speak. But yeah, I suppose time does play an important role in such things. Fingers crossed.
Well, since you bring it up, you mentioned that the Oblivion modding community has sort of shrunk, and from an outside observer, I still see a lot of Oblivion mods getting released every week on the Oblivion Nexus. Clearly more than Morrowind mods, really, and it seems like there's still a lot of modders out there working on Oblivion, trying to make the game better, so to speak.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take you on the word there, because I don't really, since I don't play the game as much these days, I literally have very little reason to go to the Nexus except to answer the occasional PM or, a question on one of my mods threads, discussion threads. So, but, I imagine there are still people who mod the game, and continue to do so, but at least, when it comes down to the, maybe I'm still living in the past, I don't really know. It's all relative, I suppose. But back in 2008, or forget 2008, 2009, 2010, obviously it was a lot more packed with people than the official modding forums. And because that was the only game, that was the newest game in the Elder Scrolls series at that point, so I'm sure that contributed a lot. But it has come. Well, I don't think anybody can argue with the fact that it has slowly started to decelerate. Yeah, at least from the way I see it. But yeah, I could be wrong.
I sort of think that the same could be said of the Morrowind modding community in that regard. I mean, it decelerates a little bit, but it's the rate of deceleration that sort of matters, Morrowind can keep going on for probably another decade on the power of the modding community right now. What with the open Morrowind game engine that's being developed that will give Morrowind a brand new game engine and stuff like that. And I think, similar projects like that for Oblivion will probably keep it going long into the future, probably, assuming that the community doesn't disengage entirely.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, the open Morrowind project is actually one of those exceptions to the rule, I think. I mean, earlier we talked about how everybody has, the total conversion trap, which entails new modders taking up huge projects that are extremely large in scope and end up kind of abandoning it halfway through. But I think Morrowind has more of such projects that actually kind of lasted the test of time, especially with Tamriel Rebuild, which I believe is still being updated to an extent, and the Open Morrowind game engine project. Those are sort of beacons in the mist, and so I guess it all comes down to the members of the community and how invested they are in it. So which I suppose differs from community to community, but one could always hope for the best, and maybe who knows? Maybe someone is going to write a new engine for Oblivion. For instance, but now that you mention it, there was a recent update to, well, not an update per se, but a re-implementation of Oblivion's graphics extender by another modder called Alnet. So he's been doing a lot of work there, and that's sort of like, that kind of proves your point, that there's still a lot more talent out there who are spending time and to improve the game and, kind of put out really, really good works of mods, I suppose. So, yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely. And, as long as that sort of thing's going on, I think Oblivion Modding probably has a pretty good future ahead of it, though maybe not as bright as the Morrowind modding community. We are, after all, fanatics in the Morrowind modding community. We are obsessed to a point of very unhealthy extent, I would say. We're basically crazy. I mean, just to be honest.
Yeah, and you just invited me to retire there. Well, I think you may have done yourself a disservice in having admitted that to me just now.
Well, we're the fun kind of crazy. The fun kind of crazy that you want to retire with and have a bunch of crazy shenanigans with. That sort of crazy. I mean, you don't want to retire to someplace boring, do you?
Not particularly, no, now that you mention it, I don't think I do. And incidentally, my name doesn't begin with M-A-D, so I think the shoe fits. So, yeah, maybe I haven't changed my mind after all.
Well, that's good to know, and we've been really getting off topic here, so I'm going to try and move on to the next question.
My apologies, yeah.
This is a user-submitted question, Big Papa Flea from Reddit, and his question is there a particular mod manager that you've used for Oblivion that you particularly enjoy using?
Well, I did use the Oblivion mod manager, that was the OBMM, back in the day when I was still playing the game. Well, I don't remember if I actually enjoyed using it per se, but it was certainly useful because up until I mentioned earlier about my first playthrough being a total mess, that was partly because of the fact that I'd installed all my mods manually, and when I didn't like one, I just kind of removed some of the files, and which kind of had internal conflicts, and essentially it ended up breaking the game in a number of ways. So OBMM did help me avoid that, but I also remember having used Rybash a bit with its mod manager feature. But yeah, those would be the two. I haven't had any cause to try out the Nexus mod manager yet, but I hear it's pretty good as well.
Now, sort of going into this next question, I realise that you said that you're kind of semi-retired at this point, though obviously not officially since you haven't moved to Morrowind. But is there anything you've had to given up to mod, like playing more games or possibly your social life?
Thankfully, it was just the former. And there's also, of course, a lot more time. I have given up a lot of time, but I wouldn't call it giving up. I think it's more, spending it elsewhere. But, not to split semantic hairs. But, but there was plenty to be had back in the day. So I could always invest a lot more time back then in modding than I can right now. But one thing that I do miss is actually playing games, or at least playing Bethesda games, which I haven't done in a long, long time. I did manage to play a bit of Skyrim after it was released, but it was actually initial few 50 hours or so. That's probably when I started getting down to writing one of those script extender plugins for Skyrim. And that was it. That kind of ended right there. I'd like to get back to it someday, I guess. Maybe when I'm retired.
Yes, retired in Morrowind, that is. And I'm sort of in the same boat with you with regards to Skyrim. I think I last played it in January of 2012. I had maybe 70 hours in. I've never finished the main quest. I've never finished any of the factions. I haven't even been to 3 of the 5 major cities in Skyrim. It's like something I've been putting off to do when I have more time, and of course, you never have more time. You always have less time.
Yeah, that is... Well, yeah, that is an axiom, if I ever had one.
Now, are there any skills you've learned from modding? And if so, have you been able to use those skills anywhere else? I know you've said that you kind of have a background in coding, so maybe that's transferred the other way instead.
Well, it's sort of a two-way transfer because I had returned to coding. Well, I'd taken a long break from writing code, programming as such, at the time when I got involved in the modding scene. So my writing scripting mods and whatnot kind of reintroduced me back to the programming aspects only in a completely different domain. So that kind of helped me, sort of gain a different perspective of how things work out in other areas. And so it helped in that way, and it had also helped me to kind of introduce scripting, at least in Oblivion Interviews, served as a springboard to introduce myself to other aspects of programming. And of course, with the script extender plugins, I kind of went right back to sort of where I started and down to the nutty grits and bones of engine development, so to speak.
And this next question, it's really kind of off topic, and you've already kind of gone into it a little bit. You've already talked about how you enjoy the Witcher 3, and before we started the interview, FPS games. But are there any other games outside of the Elder Scrolls series that you really like to play? And if so, what do you like about them?
Another tough question, I see. Well, I recently did play Tales from the Borderlands, and that is something I really, really enjoy playing. I mean, it's called sort of the best. It's very much a sort of poster child for it's an RPG, as you might know, but what I would want in a game, it seems to have all of it. Writing, humor, and even the lore is sort of extremely appealing to me. And so that's one of the games I've recently played. And I've also been dabbling a bit, what was that? Yeah, Transistor and a couple of other games from the same studio, Transistor, Bastion, and I recently released, did they recently release another game? I forget. But yeah, those are some of those I'd like to play, and I have been trying to actually play a bit of Civilization, although, barely any time. So trying here is the operative word.
Oh yes, and those Telltale games like Tales of the Borderlands, I really love those because they're narrative-style games that don't really require you to do a whole lot, and provide you with something to do that doesn't take a whole lot of time. Like I've been playing the Walking Dead myself, and that's a lot of fun that doesn't take up the entire day and still allows you time to mod. And I've also been hearing things about Life is Strange, though I haven't picked that one up yet. But that's basically in the same category as those other games you mentioned.
Yeah, that is true about the time aspect of it. Yeah, I never realised it. I never thought about it that way, but that's probably why I kind of liked it a lot, because it didn't require a lot of my time to begin with, and each of these episodes were no more than a couple of hours at most. So I could essentially play them over 2 days over the weekend, and kind of still get through, and and them being so small kind of gives you the sense of having completed a game. Yeah, and that is something I've missed a lot in over the last few years, because I've always, if at all I did start a game, I always leave halfway through, since I, owing to a number of reasons, but keeping them small and episodic in size, I think that helps a lot, especially when you have a lot less time on your hands. It's true. And no, I haven't taken a look at Life is Strange either, but I do mean to. I've heard a lot about it. Maybe sometime in the next few months.
Oh yeah, there's always more time later, presumably, until there isn't, and then you're just left wondering what could have been. Now, if you could mod one other game that perhaps doesn't support mods, well, assuming you've played any games that don't support mods, what would it be?
Interesting question. Oh yeah, that actually reminds me, this was one other game I did play over the last 7-8 months. Diablo 3. I would really like for that game to have some kind of modding support, because as you know, it's an online-only game, even though it does have a single-player component. But if I were to add something, it wouldn't be a mod as such. It would essentially kind of add an offline mode to it. So yeah, I guess that would be it. But if pigs could fly, I believe that's the expression.
And I think there was quite a lot of controversy with Diablo 3 being online only, and I remember Diablo 2. That was a very offline friendly game. Really, you could play it offline. You could do it on LAN. You could get a bunch of your friends together and just do a local area network. And I remember doing that actually. That was quite a bit of fun.
Yeah, I the same thing here. I mean, I remember doing that. I mean, I remember having a huge party with about 8. It's not 8. I think it was 7 players, and we used to have a lot of fun playing Diablo 2. And it was actually kind of discouraging when they first announced that the next game was going to be online only, and it was kind of the reason why I kept from buying it all the way until early last year. But I guess now having played it for a bit, I guess I would say that it kind of does have a bit of that old hack and slash feeling to it, definitely, but it's still not the same. Then again, seeing the world through rose-colored glasses and whatnot.
Oh yes, but as a Morrowind fan, I feel obliged to mention that Morrowind fandom is not nostalgia, it is not rose-colored glasses. Morrowind is awesome, old games are awesome, you should play Morrowind. End of story.
Yes, I'm thoroughly convinced now. I shall indeed.
Is there any particular mod you released that you're most happy / proud of out of the ones you released so far?
Well, I guess... that's another hard question. Dear me. Okay, I guess the construction service tend to be my most prolific contribution to the modding scene, in my opinion, I guess. And certainly, one of the things I'm really proud about, and having been able to contribute to the community in a way that that kind of has a lot more to do with creating mods as opposed to offering another mod to play with. I mean, in my opinion, I think that kind of writing tools for the community is sort of like a very essential thing that all modding communities rely on. You can see that right now with Fallout 4, with the Fallout 4 script extender team still already working on it, and well, to be honest, I was a bit tempted to give them a hand, but time and the usual. But so anyway, I digress, and CSE would be the sort of crowning achievement, if any. The Dynamic Shadows mod would be a close second, I suppose. And also kind of fond of Pip being one of my first mods, and it's had a lasting legacy, so to speak. But a couple of other mods I'm kind of happy with too, but I think I've got more than one mod that I'm particularly most happy about. So there you go.
Sort of on the similar note, do you have a mod that hasn't received enough acclaim as you think it should have had? And if so, which one and why? And I know you say you kind of mod for yourself, so quite possibly this question doesn't really apply to you so much.
Oh, well, perhaps, I guess. But if there's one more, I think it would have been, I'd probably nominate Vector for that particularly dubious title, because I spent a lot of time working on it. For a quick description of what the mod does, Vector is basically a disease infection system which kind of overhauls how diseases are transmitted in the game. So you could, in the vanilla game, you could only contract diseases, and you couldn't infect anybody else with it. So what Vector does is it gives not only you, but it kind of implements its own engine, a disease infection engine, which adds a lot of ways to acquire diseases and to kind of infect other people with it and whatnot. And I spent a lot of time working on it. It was one of my larger, regular script mods, and I spent a lot of time having it beta tested. But the mod's release, or at least one of there was a rewrite at some time in between, and the rewrite's release wasn't very smooth. It has a number of untraceable bugs and technical issues at launch, and And I wasn't able to resolve it at that point in time because I was also involved in CSE's development. But over the years, well, recently, in fact, about not too long ago, I kind of had the time to go through it again and kind of iron out all the remaining technical issues, and it's very much in a playable state now, if I may say so myself. But it would have been nice to have heard some kind of feedback from the community had it worked the way it was supposed to have right after release, because it had a lot of interesting ideas and gameplay elements.
Oh yes, and that certainly does sound like a interesting idea. I know there were a lot of popular board games and also indie games on Steam in the past few years that have sort of been based around the whole disease vector idea, with disease spreading and global populations. I remember playing a board game that was basically just like that, where you had to stop these disease outbreaks. And it certainly seems like an interesting application that you could put in to a sort of Bethesda-like game with the open sandbox and just try and infect people with diseases.
Yeah, indeed. I think a bit of that. I had hoped they'd kind of elaborate on that particular subsystem in Skyrim, but naturally they didn't. But yeah, what have you? Maybe if it's if anything. You just know there's such a mod there now, so you're always welcome to install Oblivion and give it a shot. Maybe you'll have more fun than you did with any of those indie games with the infection systems and whatnot. Hint, hint.
Oh yes, quite possibly. And going into our final set of questions here, what do you think about the other Elder Scrolls games, such as Morrowind, Skyrim, and the Elder Scrolls Online?
As I previously mentioned, I haven't played Morrowind as well. I have a very little bit. I think I just got on the ship and got down to the first town. I think I actually fast traveled there, so it doesn't even count. So there's that. And Skyrim, well, I have played a bit of Skyrim. I guess I enjoyed it to an extent. But once again, I think I mentioned my particular opinion about it a number of times during this interview. All the Elder Scrolls games I've not had any sort of contact with, for instance, Arena or Daggerfall or any of the others. But Elder Scrolls Online is something I had considered giving a shot, but it didn't kind of engender the same amount of response that Skyrim had in me, because it wasn't being made by Bethesda, which I guess is sort of one of the defining factors of being in the Elder Scrolls game, and I'm not a huge fan of online MMORPGs, so that's probably another factor, and I guess it wasn't as enticing to me to begin with. So that kind of didn't work out either. And going through the Steam reviews on the Elder Scrolls Online game, it doesn't particularly seem like a good idea to pay for a subscription and then the game and what have you. I think that recently changed, but even so, not my cup of tea, as it were. So yes, there's essentially just one thing on my list. Things to do when it comes to the other TES games, and that would be to play Morrowind either when I retire or when the Comet Hailbop returns.
Oh yes, playing Morrowind should definitely be your number one priority, and I can definitely understand the Elder Scrolls Online. It's like not only does it not exactly feel like an Elder Scrolls game, it's the other problem is that it has a high time requirement. All online MMOs are like that, they require lots of time, so if you don't have a lot of time, it's sort of the very last thing you'll probably want to play, honestly.
Yeah, that is true, and I think one defining aspect of all MMORPGs is the grinding sort of thing. You have to entirely. It's just the same thing. I think in that way it doesn't differ a lot from regular Bethesda games. Elder Scrolls Online also has its own share of fetch this, bring that there, kill this person, decapitate this what and not what not and whatever. But it's just, it stops being enjoyable, I guess, at some point, and starts just feeling like, a very monotonous thing to do. So it never did catch my fancy. I mean, I for one, have never played World of Warcraft and don't intend to. So if that didn't entice me to play online RPGs, I don't think Elder Scrolls Online is going to.
Oh yeah, probably true. And now, finally, is there any advice you'd like to give to budding new sorry, bit of a Freudian slip there. I mean, is there any new advice any advice you'd like to give to budding new Oblivion modders out there, not Morrowind modders, looking to release their first mod?
Very well. Okay. To all those budding new Oblivion modders out there, certainly not the Morrowind modders, of course, I would suggest that, this is just precisely what I went over earlier. Yeah, modding can be overwhelming to begin with, especially when you're modding a game like Oblivion or Skyrim or, fine, Morrowind. So you have to start small, and that's the essential. That's a tenet of modding, I guess. You have to start small with making tiny tweaks and changes. For instance, how long before a particular cave gets reset and its monsters respawn or something like that, and then move on slowly. It's a process. It takes time. Just do it, but release your mod. I guess that would be the second most important thing. To not just spend too much time tweaking it or adding stuff to it. Just release it at some point. Put down a specific date or plan it up to that point and stick to the plan, I guess. And finally, to mod with the sort of right attitude, I guess. I mean, mod for yourself, and that should be sort of the main thing you're looking for. Is it an activity that you find pleasurable? Good. If it doesn't work, even if you don't get a lot of feedback or endorsements or downloads. If it does, well, you're on the right track. If not, well, to each their own, I guess. So, yeah, sure, but that would be it.
Oh yeah, it's definitely good advice, and modding is definitely a long development process. And finally, is there anyone in the community you'd like to give a shout out to?
Oh dear, lots of people maybe, but I'm just gonna the old guard, as I like to call them. Tejon, Dragonbraith, Kioma, the Team Alpha guys, and Alnet, I suppose, and then Forley, and a lot of other very prolific, and also a lot of other members who've been very, very much, a huge part of the community over these last 8 years. I've been part of it and modding. But one quick final, sort of tip is that if you do have the constructions of Extender, all you need to do is download the latest version, and you will always have, take a look at the object windows title bar. So, yeah, that would essentially answer this question if you did that.
Alright, that pretty much wraps up all the questions I have for you, so thanks again for agreeing to do this interview, and don't forget, retire in Morrowind. Utmost importance right there.
Thank you so much, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and yes, I shall not. In fact, I'm writing it down right now. Retire in Morrowind, and think about retiring in Morrowind. I'll change it a bit, but I think, we'll see how that works out.
Oh yes, I suppose we certainly will, and well, I guess that's where we're going to leave off for now, so thank you again.
Likewise.